Hello, my name is Jonathan Plucker. I am a professor at Johns Hopkins University, where I am also the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. I was asked to provide a brief analysis of the Gifted Identification Kit 412 developed for use in the United Arab Emirates. I'm going to do a quick little PowerPoint here because it will allow me to make my points a little bit faster. The Gifted Identification Kit 4-12 was developed by Professor Doctors Ziegler, Stoger, and Al-Jughamain, excuse me, for the Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum Foundation for Distinguished Academic Performance. It consists of three major stages: screening, narrowing, and inclusion. Screening and narrowing are really the two identification components. Inclusion is really the identification into practice component, which is very unique, which I will talk about in 1 minute. I don't have time to go into each of these in great detail, but everything listed in the left-hand column is a characteristic of a high-quality gifted identification system. A lot of this is drawn from recent research over the past, I'd say 20 to 25 years, but especially the last decade. We have just learned so much about what makes for a high quality, and by high quality, I mean both efficient, effective, and inclusive. And so I'm going to go through each of these. The first is whether the Gifted Identification Kit 412 reflects current theory on giftedness, especially sociocultural theory. And the way that I evaluated all of this, I sort of rated it from 1 to 3, which you will see in 1 second. I thought this was a real strength of the kit. There's a very strong emphasis on UAE cultural context and also environmental context in general. It's a very inclusive model from that perspective, looking at lots of different influences. So I gave that 3 green checks. I thought that, again, was a very big strength. The next is that the kit recommends universal screening whenever possible. It definitely does this, especially in the screening stage with the use of that teacher instrument. That's really the only time that it was used. And so this was acceptable, I thought, but this could be strengthened a little bit, and I will talk about how at the very end. Generally, we want these systems to be normed with a very large sample that is similar to the sample to the population of students with which it will be used. That was definitely the case here. So again, that is a major strength with 3 green checks. We generally want these systems to include multiple diverse measures, different types of assessment, both in terms of content and assessment type. This kit absolutely does that. They're not all universally given, but there is a very wide range. I actually don't know if I've ever seen a major identification system that was so comprehensive. So this, again, is a major strength. In general, if we're trying to be inclusive and doing this with a sense of equity, for example, not disadvantaging lower income students, we want to use what we call the or rule versus the and rule. This is really important when you're using multiple diverse measures. If a student has to perform at the highest level on every single measure, then it's actually not a very inclusive system, and you're not going to find many talented students. You're going to miss many of them, lots of false negatives. So you want to use a version of the or rule where students can perform really well in certain areas, showing you different strengths that they have, but they don't need to show it in every single area. With this system, specifically, this is addressed in the 5 different giftedness types or giftedness profiles in which students can have a range of sort of strength patterns. So I thought that was solid, but it was a little hard for me to understand how most of the data would be put into practice in that way. So it appears acceptable, but the documentation could use a little more information. Is it supported by peer-reviewed research? There appear to be a range of study on various key components. I couldn't find any studies that looked at the entire process, which may be something to consider moving forward. There is evidence that the research has been used to improve the system. That is very obvious that the system was developed over time, that the norming data was used, et cetera. Again, I couldn't find a lot of documentation about it, but I thought it was strongly implied. So this is a medium strength, but definitely a strength of the system. And then finally, identification is aligned with interventions, especially an individualized developmental approach. Basically treating each student as an individual, seeing what they need in terms of interventions to really develop as that whole gifted child who's making contributions back to the culture, to the society, to the economy. I thought this was a major strength of this model. It's not just that it's not just that the system provides good links to practice. It is specifically designed to help educators determine what the best intervention matches would be. I don't know if I have ever seen that in any system before. Everybody talks about it, but they don't actually make it part of the system. For that reason, I think this is probably the strength of the entire model. Again, very impressive. So, again, I didn't have major concerns. Let me talk about the second one first here. I did search. I couldn't find research specifically on the comprehensive use of the gifted identification kit 412 with UAE students. My sense is that research is there, but I just couldn't find it when I looked. The documentation mentions research, which is impressive, but it tends to be research on slices of the system and not the whole comprehensive system. So I think having one or two studies on that would be very helpful. And it may very well exist, and I just couldn't find it. It may not be published in English, which is another reason why I couldn't find it. The first point, moving cognitive measures to the universal screening phase. We've had lots of studies in the past few years in which researchers recommend that teacher instruments not be the universal screener, and that teacher input comes in later. The gifted identification kit is well designed to do that. Because you could just flip them across the two stages. So you can move teacher identification from the screening phase to the next phase, and then have at least one of the cognitive measures be moved to the first phase and be given to every single student. We have several studies now that provide lots of evidence that using that cognitive measure as the universal screener helps you identify far more lower income students. So that's the only sort of structural piece of this that didn't work for me 100%. I should note that the way that it's currently designed has been best practice for a long time. So this is really based on research from the last 3 to 5 years, I would say, where we've learned so much more about sort of where to put teacher input, generally later in the process, so that teachers are safety nets and not gatekeepers, tends to be the most equitable way to do it if you're trying to find talented, lower income students. In this model, again, you wouldn't have to change much. You would just have to flip the order there across the two phases. In terms of strength, again, there are many, many strengths here. Very strong theoretical base, acti-tope model, sociocultural theory. You can't get much better than the conceptual base of what this system uses. That's great. From what I could tell, I very good measurement practice, strong instrument design, very well normed, iterative design process, everything that we want to see for this sort of thing. Very strong use of many multiple diverse measures, looking at different aspects that we know contribute to talent development and excellence. That was excellent. And then finally, last and definitely not least, because this is probably the strength of the model, just very well designed so that the data provided directly feeds into how educators design interventions to help all of those students develop their talents to the fullest. As I said before, everyone talks about it, but it's never part of the model, and you always wonder if it's really happening. This gifted identification kit doesn't do lip service, as we would say. It actually does it. I cannot overemphasize how incredibly impressive that was to me. So with that, I hope this was helpful, and thank you.